mendelspod.com, advancing life science research, connecting people and ideas.
Every day we read a lot about the genomics revolution here in America. But what's going on around the world? To answer this, we're at Affymetrix and we're joined by Chris Barbazette, the VP of International Markets for Affymetrix. His territory is everywhere except North America and Western Europe. Recently, Affy's DX platform was approved for use by the SFDA in China, which is their equivalent of the FDA. And lots happening in China around the world, and that's what we're going to talk about with Chris today.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Audacity. Audacity builds health and science brand supremacy through disruptive marketing and advertising. Download Audacity's latest white paper, 4 Secrets to Brand Supremacy, for free by visiting audacityhealth.com/approach.
So, Chris, you get around the world a bit, you cover most of the population. Do you have more miles than John Glenn?
Maybe. I don't know how many John Glenn does, but in a year, like last year, for example, I flew 300,000 miles. So if you think about that, it's to go around the world once is 25,000 miles.
Right.
So on average, that's like once a month. So it is a lot. But so I traveled to the BRIC countries. Brazil, Russia, India, China, also other parts of Latin America, Asia, Middle East, Africa, Asia Pacific. So we get around, but the exciting thing and the interesting thing is we end up meeting with a lot of different people that are doing interesting things around the world.
You do, and that's why we wanted to have you on the program to talk about what you're seeing in genomics trends out there. It doesn't always get covered in the press.
Sure, yeah. So from a trend standpoint, I think there's really probably 3 things that I'd highlight. Maybe I'll mention them, and then we can talk a little bit more detail. So one thing that we see is population-specific genotyping. The second is...
So,
sure.
Explain that just a little bit.
Sure, yeah. So population-specific genotyping is really looking at, 5-10 years ago, the solutions that Affymetrix and others made were very focused on European, Caucasian groups. And one of the things that our researchers in our area that we cover saw those solutions and said that they were inadequate. Easy example for that is the pharmacogenetics and looking at the drug metabolism of some folks around the world. People metabolize drugs differently in Asia than they do in the U.S. And so really understanding that and looking at solutions that are based around that. So Affymetrix has developed some chips that are population specific. So we work with key opinion leaders and key scientists in a particular market to develop a chip that is representative of the population they want to study. So we've done that in Africa with the Pan-African array. We've done that actually.
So Pan-African, sort of all across Africa.
Exactly. In UC San Francisco, there was a Kaiser study that they had many different groups. And also in China. So there's a Chinese chip that we developed with those populations.
So by Pan-Africa, it's all across Africa.
Right. So a chip that covers the populations of all the different populations throughout Africa. In addition, we have a chip that we developed with some key scientists in China. Focus on the Chinese Han population. So it's really looking at population specific, and then you can also start to think about population and disease specific or population and pharmacogenomic specific. So that's a trend actually, is really understanding very specifically for a country or a group of people, what's their genetic structure, what's their genetic makeup, and how are they different and how are they the same as the rest of the world. So that's one trend that we see. The second is we see, I think, in our group, in our region, more of a focus to routine use, to taking genomics into a clinical setting. And there's a bunch of different examples. So one is constitutional cytogenetics and replacing traditional karyotyping. Another one is doing cancer cytogenetics, so the same in cancers. monogenic disorders or single cell or single gene mutations, cardiac different diseases, cancers. I mean, there's many chips that are coming on the market or that are available that Affy or Affy's partners make that really seem to resonate locally in some of those markets. And then the third area that I mentioned as far as a trend is ag bio, or using in agriculture, using, of course, these are organisms and they have DNA, and so understanding what is the genetic makeup of some of these species, and also from a commercial value standpoint. A lot of the developing markets and developing regions around the world do have a big agriculture economy. Mm-hmm. And if they can optimize or improve upon the yield of the crops that they make, or improve upon the quality of the livestock that they're breeding, that has a big economic benefit. And in places like Brazil, in places like Russia, India, food and food supply is an important thing for the world. And we're looking at how to expand the food supply, and a lot of these countries are investing a lot of money in understanding the answers to those questions.
So looking at the first trend that you talked about, the population-specific genetics,
yep.
Are you seeing more research around the world that uses your chip? I mean, that's becoming much more custom to the country?
So one example is PGENI, the Pharmacogenomics for Every Nation, where they're really looking at what's the genotype on a national level for certain countries, and then what's the what's the drug effect for a certain population to make it the best for a local population.
I mentioned the DX platform, Affy's DX platform, has been approved by the SFDA in China. What does this mean for diagnostics over there?
Sure. So it means a couple things. One is it's a big market. I mean, there's over 60,000 hospitals in China. There's over 200 IVF clinics that are looking at different genomic solutions to kind of implement in the fact that our platform is now Sino FDA cleared. I think does a couple things. One is it shows that the platform is ready for the market. It also shows that the Chinese government, at least for some level, believes that this is a technology that they could apply. And in China, there's a big focus on evolution of medicine and skipping generations of technology. For example, you can think about most people in Africa and China go from not having a telephone to having a cell phone. This, and the idea of leapfrogging generations of technology is prevalent in personalized medicine and healthcare as well. They want to implement what is being implemented in the future in the U.S., not what was implemented 5 or 10 years ago. So as a result, there's a big push to get ahead. And the train from the airport between Shanghai and downtown is a maglev train. They don't put the older generations in, they put the latest and greatest in and make it world class. And they want to do the same thing for genomics and for medicine.
And so are they further along in some ways in personalized medicine?
So I think in some ways, and speaking just generically internationally, I think that there's a couple of components that really make the demand and the interest a little bit more robust internationally. So a couple of things I would say. One is that the regulatory landscape, a lot of times for a particular test or a particular type of test, is reliant on the clinician or the doctor's medical judgment rather than a national standard. So that makes it easier and faster to adopt. Another factor is the reimbursement landscape. Some countries have a national reimbursement strategy. Australia, for example, I was mentioning before the constitutional cytogenetics, and the traditional method is to use karyotyping. And what the key scientists in Australia did is they went to the government and said, using a microarray is effectively doing a digital karyotype. And as a result, we would like to get reimbursement of the country from the Medicare system of microarrays, and the government agreed. And so they extended that, and that on a national level then speeds the adoption of personalized medicine even faster. And then you also have some very specific countries that have a strong interest to adopt. So you have different countries that have maybe a high prevalence of recessive disorders that, in Israel, for example, where, you can think about if you have a carrier status of a couple where a couple is going to get married, they're going to want to know what their carrier status is ahead of having children and understand what issues may come up as they have children, and if they know they're going to have a problem, they can use different medical technologies to minimize the effect. And so I think all of those things in combination really help introduce the use faster, and the adoption of routine use much faster.
So there are some sort of issues specific to the country, like Israel, which is pushing them further than perhaps we are here. And then also because some countries have the National Health Service, that makes it more streamlined and easier. I think it was in the news this week that, was it Norway or Sweden, has approved genomics in their...
Yeah. So I mean, we see that frequently, where a country, and really the process and the way that it happens is the government will, and the Ministry of Health will really look to some of the key scientists, some of the key doctors, and say, what do you think? Or some of those key doctors bring that to the government and say, this is a very fast way to improve the quality of our healthcare and the quality of the healthcare that's provided to the people in our country. And so, let's get it in. Let's clear it from a regulatory standpoint. Let's reimburse it. And if you have those couple of things, it really speeds up the process of adoption of genomics in a particular country in a more routine use.
So China is a big story.
Yes.
I mean, this decade, this century. And you spend a bit of time over there. What else is going on? I mean, can you give us a picture?
Sure. So the Chinese government spends, they have these 5-year cycles of spending plans. So they're on their 12th 5-year cycle that started a year ago. And what they do is they'll set the national priority about how they're going to spend money and how that they're going to look to improve the country in certain spending initiatives. There's over $3.5 billion that are money in this spending cycle that are related to biology and medicine. So it's improvement in food supply, it's improvement in hospitals, it's improvement in diagnostic testing capability. So there's many different areas of improvement that China is focused on. And then when you have 1.4 billion people from a base of a population, that does become big. And I think then China, it becomes an issue of how do you modernize at that scale across the country. And in China's case, the government does need to be involved to help the stimulus and help the direction and help the funding. And that's really how it ends up happening. Another interesting example of something that's kind of unique to our territory from a work standpoint, from a scientific standpoint, is we have a customer in Saudi Arabia, in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, at King Faisal Medical Research Center, named Fauzan Al-Qaraya, and he's a researcher that is their sample set that they're looking at is the tribes in Saudi Arabia and the population in Saudi Arabia, and within those tribes and the tribal culture, there's a lot of intermarrying within the tribe, and that creates a lot of genetic problems, and so. What Fauzan has done is he's used a combination of exome sequencing and our Axiom platform, and within 1 year he discovered 29 clinically relevant genes using the combination of these two tools, which is really powerful. And because of this unique sample set, he's able to get to really interesting genetic questions and then solutions or identification of significant genes. In a very rapid way using the latest technology.
another thing that happens more in your area than like here in North America is there's more traditional medicine, like in China
Right.
and India. Is genomics coming in contact with that, affecting that?
Yeah, they're starting to, yes, the answer is yes. They're starting to become more and more kind of connection points. I think that there's an interest at a governmental level to integrate more genomics and science to something that's not well understood or characterized. So, looking at what's the chemical compound of some of the traditional Chinese medicine or TCM medicines. And so there's a lot of money, I think, especially in China, being spent around how do you standardize? How do you
Right.
make it more repeatable and more reliable in getting to what the core chemical compound is of what's being prescribed or given, and then understanding the genetic effect of what that is. So yeah, that's an area that's coming onto the scene.
Mm-hmm. Because in China, there's more money spent on traditional medicine than
By a lot. I mean, it's billions of dollars, and it's a very high percentage of the medicines are traditional Chinese medicines versus kind of Western pharmaceuticals.
Okay, the third thing you mentioned was ag bio.
Right.
What can you tell us that's going on in your territory there?
Sure. So in ag bio, I think that there's a couple things to say. Brazil would be one of the places that I highlight. Brazil is
the big beef industry.
Well, not only beef, but if you think about Brazil as a percent of their gross domestic product compared to the U.S., Brazil spends more money on ag research than the U.S. does. And so one of the things as a developing country that they, as a country, can do to develop its economy is to have a strong, robust agriculture sector. And Brazil is on the cutting edge, on the leading edge of implementing different technology solutions into those into science and into industry down there. And there's an organization in Brazil called Embrapa, and it's under the Department of Agriculture. And there are these different Embrapa facilities all throughout Brazil. So there's an Embrapa to study beef for milk production. There's an Embrapa that's separate to study beef for beef production. There's Embrapas for soy and wheat and rice. They're all studying how to improve crop yield, how to improve the disease resistance, how to improve for animals, how to improve the traits of an animal that will make the trait of that animal more valuable. So in other words, a cow that will have certain traits after it's slaughtered, like meat marbling or fat content, will be more valuable. And to do a genetic test to increase the value is now becoming a very inexpensive thing to do. And so they're looking at how to implement that in a very routine way. As well in Brazil, there is a push, and there's a lot of actually foreign investment by energy companies to use ag bio and crops as fuels and renewable energy. And so there's a lot of examples in Brazil in particular about energy companies coming in and investing significant amount of money to spur innovation in this area. So I would say Brazil is a really interesting story and an emerging story relative to the ag bio economy. The other one that I would mention is in China. BGI, which is one of the largest sequencing capability in the world, well, the largest sequencing capability in the world. They've become a bioinformatics powerhouse. They've got over 1,000 bioinformaticians. Really an impressive capability there. And they have part of their research is they have this tree of life, and they try to sequence anything and everything in the world. Anything that tastes good to eat, anything that lives, crawls, moves, whatever, they want to sequence it. And they're doing it for the purpose to sequence it, to understand the genetic code of all these different organisms. And we actually reached an agreement with BGI in January to commercialize any of the sequence data onto a chip. And so we have the ability then to go make a chip if you have a customer who's interested in a particular species but not done the sequence yet and is interested in making a chip. We have the ability to do that to serve the broader ag bio community. So really, I think there are lots of different ag bio examples, but between China and Brazil, I would say those would be two that are really becoming world-class or are world-class and becoming significant stories.
Okay, so you talk about BGI and sequencing. I mean, sequencing technology has been the other big story.
Yep.
I mean, in the U.S., a lot more sequencing is being done. And, I mean, can you talk about, when sequencing, when arrays? Are arrays still the leading technology worldwide?
So there's a lot of excitement about sequencing. It's a really powerful technology. There's a lot of interest and buzz. So I think in certain markets there's a curiosity about sequencing. They get a sequencer and they play with it and try to understand what kind of data they get out of it. But as I mentioned earlier, I think one of the interests and the challenges for people in my region is how to handle the vast amount of data that comes from sequencing and the amount of new sequence that is generated. So in that case, what we see a lot of times is arrays are used and microarrays are used as a validation technology. So you think about
validating the sequence.
Validating the sequencing. So for sequencing, you're looking at a small number of samples and looking at very deep content, looking base by base and understanding what's the genetic code. With arrays, you're wanting to look at more of a higher level view, some very important regions, but thousands or hundreds of thousands or even millions of samples over and over and over to do a couple things, to validate what you found on the sequence, but also, as I mentioned, getting arrays more into routine use. So there's oftentimes a pathway. There is a pathway to doing sequencing, to doing like an association study, even in an agriculture world, and then getting down to routine use. And that kind of pipeline of development is true for human disease and for looking at breeding and looking at selection of certain traits. That pathway to new discovery, to association, to routine use. And the association to routine use portion is the natural technology is an array.
It's an array.
And so we see that.
So they're really the workhorse.
Yeah, and they're the ones that on a routine basis that as sequencing technology gets cheaper, so does array technology. And so overall in the market you're having all these technologies getting less expensive. But if you want to really look at high throughput and routine use, an array is a very complementary technology to take that new sequence and then put it on an array and run it over tens of thousands of patients or hundreds of thousands of patients in a routine, clinical type application. And so as you get into as you get an array downstream into a routine use, really today the only solution for a regulatory cleared solution is a microarray. There's still some experimentation about using NGS in a clinic and sequencing, next generation sequencing in a clinic. But from a regulatory landscape, today it's an array.
I'm curious about your customers, the people you actually meet with,
right.
Talk to, educate. Is it different than here in the U.S. for Affymetrix?
So I would say in some ways it's the same. So in some ways it's university professors and PIs and so forth. In some ways it's different. So for example, in I would say it is a little bit, but we get involved more on a national level internationally. So what I mean by that is ministries of health, regulatory agencies, national institutes of health, where they're trying to set the path forward for a country. They're interested in understanding what technologies are available to help do that. And so we do get involved in some interesting discussions. And then you also see sometimes some obscure applications, like our first system Affymetrix ever sold into Russia was to the Sports Institute. So essentially to do association studies about athletes and athletics and understand the genetic basis for high performance in athletics. So in some cases, in some cases it is different and it becomes more kind of nationalistic, country by country.
Okay. And so you usually talk to the national government?
Yeah, I mean, in some places where we have meetings with at least maybe not minister level, but one layer below. In some cases, it is at a ministry level, and so yeah, it really varies country by country. The other part of it is, as I think I mentioned earlier, a lot of times it will be, the most famous, say, cytogeneticist in the country we work with, and then they and we bring that to the government as this is a solution that the government should adopt. And usually when it gets into the kind of the national level, a country really would rather hear from their own citizen who's the expert in the field saying this is what the country should do, rather than a company saying this is what the country should do.
Are there times when you're there, you have this technology and ideas of how it can be used, but people are resistive?
So it depends. Yeah,
it
depends on the country, but I would say in general, people, and this is a generality, but people look at our type of technology and they see a lot of promise and a lot of hope to help improve the circumstance that their country's in and help develop it. So if we can show them that it works and show them that it's a reasonable technical solution, and show them proof points or cases in the U.S. or Europe that it works, then we usually get over that barrier pretty quickly, because I think there is a hunger to adopt these types of technologies globally.
Worldwide.
Worldwide.
So you would say the trend is definitely more sort of, assertive or strong to adopt these technologies when they can.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you think about at a national level, governments and ministries of health and so forth are always looking for how do we reduce the cost of healthcare, at the same time increasing the quality of healthcare. And I think genomics is the answer, or part of the answer to that. If you think about in agriculture, they want to have an agriculture economy that is reliable, that's drought resistant, that is doing well and repeatable and reliable to help support their economy. That again, there's a lot of solutions that are related to genomics that can help them.
What's the most obscure place you've been out promoting a race?
So it's probably in Egypt, Mauna Fea at the Liver Institute there. It's about 2 hours or so by car from Cairo. It's you've got to dodge ox-drawn carts that have melons that are going to the market. You've got to dodge all kinds of stuff as you're driving out there.
So the ox cart's in front of you, and
right?
You come by with your gene chips,
right? And we got to navigate through the traffic and get out there. And we were actually I was out there just a couple months before all the changes in the Arab Spring hit Egypt, and it was a fascinating place. But there's actually gene chip systems all over the world. I mean, there's a gene chip system in Caracas, Venezuela. There's gene chip systems, throughout the world in very obscure places.
You told me that the Arab Spring cost you a bit of money.
It did.
Sort of whatever your plans were.
Right. So, throughout that part of the world, there's a strong interest in integrating our technology, and when all that stopped, and when the countries went into protest, a lot of the momentum stopped as well, and they're having to be reset. So Egypt, Libya, some of these countries, Tunisia, where things kind of got put on hold for a while.
So in preparing for the interview, I thought Chris's main job must be to educate, because you're out there in all this territory where they may not know, right, even how to use it. Yeah, they're interested, but how do you use this?
Yeah, I know, for sure. I mean, one of the things that I tell my group and that I talk about within my team that cover the international market is that we're evangelists of genomics, that we're out there getting the word out, and we do that in a couple different ways. We do that, of course, ourselves, in talking about what our technology does and how it's applied to all these various areas of science. Another thing that we do is bring scientists and clinicians into our region and provide a personalized genomics or personalized medicine or medical genomics type of showcase, where these are leading scientists, leading clinicians from the US and Europe, and they're then in a local market speaking to local scientists and local clinicians about how they've implemented our science and use these types of solutions. And we're seeing an evolution of this actually now. A couple years ago, it was folks from the US and scientists and researchers from the US and Europe talking about their work. And we just did a program in India and Australia leading up to the Human Genome Meeting. And the one in India and Australia, for example, we had a researcher from Mexico come talk about his work in cancer. So, we look at ways to showcase, but also educate. So, there's a big initiative called H3 Africa that the Wellcome Trust and NIH are funding for Africa and the development of science in Africa, and specifically genomics in Africa. And Affymetrix later this year is going to be doing an educational series on what are technologies that can help Africa to develop its genomics capability.
So why you? How did you get international markets?
I've always been interested in things international. I did an exchange program in Japan. I lived in Japan for a while. In previous parts of my career, I worked internationally. I mean, it's always been something that I've been interested in. My parents traveled with me and my sister growing up, so I've always had the kind of a disposition or an interest to things international and things that are global.
It takes a special kind of personality because there's all these different cultures, and how much can you respect the culture?
Sure. I mean, I think it's all about people's experience and perspective as they're growing up and maturing in the things that they experience. And I think someone who grows up in a developing economy has a totally different set of experiences than someone who grows up in the U.S. or Western Europe. And I think that if you're in the position like I'm in, you have to have a respect for that. You have to have an understanding that people have different perspectives, and people are a product of their experiences, and their experiences and their perspectives come from their experience. And so I think if you have that mindset and you're flexible and you're kind of easygoing, then things work out.
What's the biggest surprise you've had in your job?
I don't know I don't know how it's a big surprise.
Selling genomics internationally.
It's actually stumping me. Well, actually, I'll tell you that. Okay, my biggest surprise, probably selling internationally, is that a lot of times when I go to a remote place in the world, middle of Brazil, middle of China, middle of somewhere that I feel like I'm a long way from home, oftentimes when I meet with a customer and I have a casual conversation with them, a lot of times they're educated in the US or they're educated in Western Europe, and there's a more common experience than diverse experience. So I would say that that's a learning that I have had over my time.
That you had more in common.
That have more in common. A lot of times, especially given that some of these folks are elite researchers in their country, their master's or postdoc or doctorate is from a US or Western Europe university. And so, I live in the Bay Area, and I'll end up having a conversation and people ask me where I live, and they'll get very specific because, they went to Stanford or they went to Cal or they went to, UC Davis. And so it's actually more common that I have links around where I live and where I'm from because they've spent a significant amount of time in the U.S.
So when you're at the bar with your friends and you say, here's what I do, what do you say?
So I say I have a pretty cool job. I have an interesting job, and what I say is, I get to fly around the world and I talk to lots of different scientists, researchers, doctors, clinicians, and talk to them about how to use genomics in what they want to do and what they want to achieve, and how to make their countries better, how to make their medical system better, how to make their medical tests better, how to improve their agriculture and their crops. And ultimately that becomes that they're the country is better, and their medical system is better, and it improves the quality of life. So it's actually, there's a fair amount of kind of meaningfulness of what we do, and that part
probably on a weekly basis.
Yeah, actually almost on a daily basis, and that part's really pretty good.
So you're in a lot of airports. You're
Yeah.
talking about how many miles you put on.
Right.
You got an airport story for us?
I have a few, but probably one of the more interesting ones. I have spent a lot of time in airports. I actually got deported from Turkey one time.
Really?
Yeah. Just to tell it briefly, I was flying from Vienna, Austria to Istanbul, and my passport, the cover ripped off from the passport in the airplane. It just happened by accident, and it was of course a very well used passport. And it ripped off from the spine.
Your passport needs laminated or something special.
Yeah. So when I got to the immigration officials, I gave it to them, and they said, "Well, we're not going to let you in." And so they gave me two choices. One choice was to leave and go wherever I wanted. The second was to stay in the airport. And I said, "Well, those aren't two very good options." And so ultimately, what I chose is to leave. But the flight availability, I had to end up staying in the airport for 24 hours. And so, I had all these different images going through my head of different movies of like Tom Hanks in the terminal where he's stranded in the airport, or, Midnight Express and, getting put into some detention cell in Turkey. I mean, there were all these different, all this different imagery going through my head. But ultimately, finally, as I was leaving, the immigration police walked me to the plane and made sure I got on the plane, and I was talking to this younger guy he was actually a really nice guy, and he said, "I looked at your passport. You've been everywhere." And I looked at him and I said, "Yeah, except Turkey." And he said, "I'm sorry, it didn't work out. Please come back again when you have a valid passport." But yeah, it's I see plenty of airports for sure.
You have a lot of great stories. I would love to just keep talking to you, but we'll wrap things up. So we're at the headquarters of Affymetrix in Santa Clara with Chris Barbazette, the VP of International Markets. Thank you very much for having us over.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Audacity. Audacity builds health and science brand supremacy through disruptive marketing and advertising. Download Audacity's latest white paper, 4 Secrets to Brand Supremacy, for free by visiting audacityhealth.com/approach.
So this is the Affymetrix museum that has a lot of the original equipment, some of the notebooks, some of the original chips, and kind of shows the evolution of the technology and what the technology is and looks like.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
And that looks
So
2 years old.
so that's the original system, computer and the overall workstation. So
This is the scanner.
yeah, right. And so this is all evolved into that system. So this is the kind of the modern version of what we sell now. So we add in a computer workstation and a couple of complementary pieces, but this is basically what's evolved from the original down to what we sell now. Ultimately, we create a chip. And so you can see these are some of the original masks as well as the film, and then you can see the original microarray that was made by our founder.
So this is the very first one
Yep.
that Steve Fodder designed.
Yeah, the Steve developed. It's all been acquired.
This is what?
So these are the wafers that the wafers then are cut up into an individual chip. So this is what a wafer looks like when it goes through a manufacturing process.